You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and if you are navigating a faith deconstruction yourself or are simply fascinated by stories of faith deconstruction, by stories about Mormonism and religion generally, then you are in the right place. Welcome. I hope you make yourself at home. Today's episode is a little different than what I usually do, and I actually have a story to tell to kind of kick off my thinking as to why I'm talking about what I'm talking about today. There has been some drama, how do I even classify this? There's been some things going on that I've been unpacking personally that I was thinking, you know what? I'm having a lot of thoughts and realizations and learning a lot of things and thinking a lot of things. Why don't I just bring this to Girls Camp, to the podcast? So we are going to be just chatting about this together. And I want to kind of tell you a story of how this all unfolded to get there. I was actually preparing to do an episode this week about Brad Wilcox. I was collecting stories from you all about Brad Wilcox, and we were kind of just going to talk about Brad Wilcox, who is a general authority in the Mormon Church, who has written books about Mormon doctrine and given a lot of speeches, who is a professor at BYU. We still might do this episode eventually, so I'm not going to get too into that. But I was preparing this episode. I had a whole outline, the whole thing. And then I got tagged. No, actually, someone DM'd me a video on Instagram. It was a Word Radio little clip from a Word Radio podcast. Word Radio is a not Mormon officially endorsed podcast, but it's a podcast ran by Mormon people where they talk about Mormon issues. I'll read their little blurb and bio. But in this little reel is a man named Kwaku, and he's kind of been in the pro-Mormon space for a long time. And he was basically just calling me out. I actually stitched that video, and you can find that on my Instagram or TikTok, so you can see what that video was and kind of what I said in response. We'll dig way more into it. But I saw the video and kind of felt uncomfortable, of course, but I kind of sat with it, formulated a response, did a reel about it, got a lot of feedback from you all, which is always helpful in helping me kind of like process all of it. And I thought that was that. But then I came to find out from someone else on Instagram that what I thought was kind of an isolated clip from Word Radio about me, like I kind of imagined it was like, oh, I don't know, Haley Rawl and Girls Camp came up. No, actually, there was a whole 30-minute episode specifically about me. The title of this episode is Black Comedian, referencing Kwaku, roasts the white privilege of ex-Mormon mean girl, Haley Rawl. I actually didn't watch the whole episode. I need to give a huge shout out off the bat to a YouTube channel called Cultural Hall. I don't know who's behind it because they don't have their name in their bio or anything, but I will find this person and credit them. They do hate watch videos of Mormon podcasts. And so they did a recap video of the video they did about me, which bless them for doing so because I just watched their recap, definitely got the gist, but didn't have to watch the whole 30 minutes of basically being shit on by Mormon men. So that was nice to be able to kind of like see what people were saying about me without having to give my views to Word Radio and have to watch the whole thing. But then I did go to the Word Radio video itself, and I made the very bad mistake, and I knew it was a mistake, and I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I ended up reading through the comments on that video, which we will also talk about in depth. But the thing I want to say here off the bat before we dive into all the details is I was reading those comments. There was some kind of nasty comments, many nasty comments, and then just some kind of crazy comments, just some kind of general run-of-the-mill mean comments. And as I was reading through, I was just thinking and feeling a lot of things. And part of what I thought was, I just don't think I want to do some snarky episode on a specific Mormon figure, even though it's very different than what Word Radio did about me for many reasons, in my opinion, but it kind of just took some of the fun out of like snarking on Brad Wilcox because I don't know. I think the differences are important to point out because there are ex-Mormon creators that do kind of snarky commentary on people like Brad Wilcox and, you know, on various Mormon individuals, which I think is actually really important. I think there's a lot of value in calling out problematic people. I think there's a difference to me because Brad Wilcox, if we're going to use him as an example, he is, as I said, a figurehead institutionally because he's been called by the Mormon powers that be to be a general authority in the church. He's written books that the church promotes. He's a BYU professor. Pointing out how Brad Wilcox is problematic in all the ways that he is very different than a Mormon podcast who is, you know, promoting a $100 billion organization, et cetera, coming for and attacking the character of an ex-Mormon content creator, little old me. But anyway, that aside, I might do the Brad Wilcox episode eventually, but it kind of just shifted my perspective a little bit and just kind of had me reflecting on a lot of things. It caused me to think about really how I want to continue operating in an ex-Mormon content creation space and just trying to like realign with my mission and my purpose. And I'm just not sure if the Brad Wilcox kind of more snark style episode necessarily does that. Again, not because I think it's a bad thing to do by any means. I do think it's a really important thing, but I don't know. I just needed some more time to kind of reflect and more so to think about how I wanted to approach that, because I guess I think that there can be cruelty and mean-spiritedness that people leverage publicly against each other. And it's kind of done in the name of, well, they're just problematic people, right? Like the Ward Radio people probably just think, well, Haley's problematic and she's talking shit on the Mormon church, so we can talk shit on her and make personal attacks on the things she does and wears and how she gets swig every day. A little foreshadowing there. We have much to dissect when it comes to my swig habits. But I don't know. I just think that it is something to consider. Maybe intentionality behind it, or I guess just checking my own self on like, yeah, I think it's very valuable to call out all the problems in the church, but where are the boundaries with that as far as when it comes to actual individuals? And, you know, there's a lot to be said there, but that just kind of was why I decided instead of doing the Brad Wilcox thing for now, which also is a bummer because there are so many Brad Wilcox stories that really, I think, need to see the light of day eventually, and I think hopefully will. But that said, I'm sitting on that episode for now, kind of reevaluating, and today we're just going to react to, kind of unpack the things that were said about me in that Ward Radio video. There was also another video, also happened to come about in the same time period by another Mormon creator, also reacting to my content. So we're just going to talk about all of that. And it actually sparked, which gives way too much credit to the Ward Radio people, but it did spark for me a lot of thinking that I think has been beneficial, that hopefully can be beneficial beyond just like, I'm a person who's speaking about this publicly. Just a lot of thinking that I was like, I think this maybe applies a little more broadly as well. And if anything, maybe it's interesting. Hopefully it is. Okay, so first things first, I think it's important I read the description of Ward Radio as penned by Ward Radio themselves. Yeah, let me just read it. We delight in truth, capital T, truth. We denounce deception. They actually capitalized denounce and deception, so maybe the capital T truth was just random capitalization. I don't know. We have fun. We are a refuge from Babylon. Ward Radio is a popular culture, doctrine, and current event commentary program hosted by the most intelligent and handsome men and women in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Be warned, we are not apologists. We are comedians, radio hosts, and comics who simply call it how we see it. Haters call this, quote, apologetics, while some believers call it, quote, defending Zion, ... We just call it fun. Oh, and by the way, the church is true and Joseph Smith did nothing wrong. LOL. I want to give the benefit of the doubt in saying that they were being kind of like silly self-aware. I think the most intelligent and handsome men and women piece was an attempt at some silly self-awareness. Didn't quite land for me personally, but I'm not so sure how to take the tone of the rest of this bio. But I appreciate the bio because I think it gives us a pretty good feel, pretty good vibe check for what we're working with here, particularly that last line. Oh, and by the way, the church is true and Joseph Smith did nothing wrong, period, LOL, period. I don't think I need to expound much further. I think that kind of speaks for itself there. Okay, so the episode, Black Comedian Roasts the White Privilege of Ex-Mormon Mean Girl, Haley Rawle. I actually really do encourage you to go watch the Cultural Hall recap just because it's fucking funny. The first thing that the commentator says, I wish I knew their name, but they were like, the first problem with this episode is that it says Black Comedian when it refers to Kwaku. And then it's like, da-da, like that sound, because he's not very funny. Basically, they spend about 30 minutes mocking me, and the whole premise of the video is that they're saying that it's hypocritical that I personally speak out against the church because apparently all of the good things that I have and my whole life I owe to the church, which I'm now speaking out against and critiquing and calling harmful, etc. The first thing I want to talk about is privilege as a white woman in the ex-Mormon space. This is absolutely a real thing, and it's something that I think about and I reckon with. And I think I could do a much better job, honestly, of kind of reckoning with that more publicly and also just, using my privilege better than I do. Privilege is such a funny one. It's something that it can be a hard thing to talk about. And it even sounds silly to say that because it's like, yeah, well, it's harder to just like not be privileged. So people with various types of privilege need to be better at talking about these things. And I want to be. It's an important conversation to have. I really think it is. I really appreciated hearing from a lot of you who said that you feel like I acknowledge my privilege when it seems like appropriate to do so. I'd like to think that's the case, but like I said, not saying I'm perfect at it. I've talked about this a bit before, but I think when you leave Mormonism, it can be easy to think that you are deconstructed and enlightened and you've moved beyond patriarchy and you've moved beyond racism and homophobia, et cetera, by nature of leaving a racist, homophobic, sexist organization. But obviously those things run so much deeper than Mormonism and are so deep in our conditioning that I think there's still so much work to do around unpacking all of that. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do a whole episode on privilege right now, but I just want to say that's a real thing. And it's something that I think about and should think about more. The thing that was so interesting with what Ward Radio was trying to say about me was they were basically saying that, okay, because white women do have privilege, and because white women have privilege generally, but Mormonism also privileges white women, I think their point was like, okay, you've been privileged and you've benefited from that privilege, but now you're speaking out against the system that privileged you. That's odd to me. This is kind of the gist of what I said in my stitch because, yeah, if we only allowed people who weren't privileged to speak out against systems, then that would create an unnecessary burden on people who weren't privileged. And actually, we all need to be speaking out against systems, whether they privileged us or not. I also think the privilege conversation is interesting because yes, I absolutely carry a lot of privilege, my whiteness, my straightness, some class privilege, which we'll also talk about, but I'm also a woman, right? Which doesn't mean that I don't have those other privileges, but I also, in a lot of ways, was not privileged in Mormonism and growing up in a Mormon Utah culture. I experienced a lack of privilege in some cases as well. It feels a little silly to me to feel like it does feel silly fully to me to feel like you can only speak on things if you are the least privileged, and that gets complicated too. I think there's a lot to be said about sharing the mic and like sharing platforms and stuff, but I don't know. It's hard for me not to see this critique coming from the ward radio people simply as just not liking what I have to say. And so it's like, oh, well, she can't speak out against something that privileged her, but that's really not what it's about for them. Also, I don't mean to say this to not acknowledge the point of privilege, but the irony is just so thick when you have Mormon men lecturing anybody about privilege, like literally anybody, because when you're comparing the privilege of like me as an individual having a platform, a podcast versus like the institution of the Mormon Church and the way that as an institution privileges people and does all these bad things because it has so much more power to do so many more bad things. It's just ironic because if you want to talk about privilege, Mormon guys, like we can talk about privilege. And that's not because I'm like, oh, like, I'm so much less privileged than you, Mormon men. But it's like, yeah, like, do you really want to have the conversation about privilege? Is that the territory you want to get into? Because if we flipped that around, I think we all know where that conversation is going to go. One thing that one of them said, there was like 3 guys talking, and one of them said this phrase where they said she has raised in the church privilege, or she's like raised in the church privileged. And there was an interesting conflation to me of privileges of society being a white woman versus like actual direct, the Mormon Church gave me everything I have, which they weren't differentiating between at all. And it actually caused me to think a lot about what has the Mormon Church given me, which I've mentioned many a time here on the podcast. There's a lot of things the Mormon Church gave me. A cheap education, got to go on a mission, which, mixed bag. Met my husband. I think we started our life earlier as a married couple, which granted us some advantages financially. Like we were able to get Pell Grants to go to school because our income was lower because we were married and it wasn't based off of our family income, etc. So certainly there are some benefits financially, if we're speaking of financial things specifically, that I benefited from growing up in the church and that I'm very grateful for. I was thinking though, not that this is even necessary because it really actually is irrelevant, which will be my next point. But I was kind of thinking about, but by the time you factor in tithing, like paying 10% of your income for most of your life, my parents paying 10% of their income, all of the free labor, going on a mission, free labor, doing callings, free labor, paying for a mission, which was paid for by my mom, and I think my uncle pitched in actually. By the time you factor that all in, it's kind of starts to balance some of that out a little bit. Like, yes, I got a cheap education, but what did I pay for it? And that's not even, of course, considering emotional ramifications and things that we experience in the church too. I don't think I can say like net positive financially to have been Mormon for 25 years or not net positive, but just kind of something interesting to think about. I kept thinking as I was watching their video, they're actually not making like really actually good points, but like they're touching on some things here that we can touch on, like we can talk about that are like important things to talk about, but just kind of missing it, like not quite getting there. And I think it's just because the whole point of it was just to kind of like be mean and like funny, and that was what they wanted to do as opposed to having a real conversation about some of these things. It was more of like a shock value thing. But anyway, I was joking to Bentley as I was like talking about some of the things that they said, and I was like, I honestly think that I am doing a much better job of critiquing and even snarking on myself than they could ever do. And maybe that's the ultimate win, is like, oh, I could do a way better job at even this. I digress. I was talking to Samantha Shelley from Self on the Shelf about this, and I was kind of like talking her through some of the things that it's like sparked for me. And she was kind of like, Haley, like, these criticisms are not coming in good faith. When people are just acting in bad faith, when they're just trying to be mean because it feels good to be mean or entertaining to be mean, it's really difficult to engage with anything they're saying because it's just like not in good faith. And I thought that was a really interesting way of framing it that was helpful for me too. And yeah, I guess I'm actually giving more value to the things they said than they probably deserve any credit for. But here I am doing it because I couldn't stop myself from just actually thinking about it and looking at some different angles of it. So I guess you're welcome, Word Radio. Here's something. One of the things that was so funny to me that they really harped on is the fact that I drink swig. If you're watching, here's my swig drink. I get a swig every single day. Hopefully. It's a bad day if I'm not able to. And this is my swig drink. It is a Big Al Diet Coke, fresh coconut and lime. I usually order this with 2 gummy sharks for the twins who are usually in the back seat. And they were talking about how dare I be a, quote, suburban swig girl and also be speaking out against Mormonism because is not suburban swig girl a Mormon aesthetic? Sure. Yeah, I started liking swig and flavored sodas because I was a Mormon. And now I still like them and I still enjoy getting a swig every single day. Doesn't have any relevance at all to speaking out against the church or whatever. There was kind of this really intense focus on like aesthetic and appearance and how apparently I have an aesthetic of a Mormon girl, but I'm speaking out against the Mormon church. And I'm kind of like, yeah, because I am a Mormon girl in a lot of ways. Like if you look at my life, if you look at the things that I do, I live in Utah, I drink soda, sure. But who the fuck cares? And like, why does that really matter? And does that really have anything to do with speaking out about the toxicity and the problems of the Mormon church? It doesn't really at all. However, it is a really convenient way to get some jabs in towards a woman and say she's a basic bitch, essentially, that acts like all the other girls, but then wants to have her cake and eat it too because she wants to speak out against oppressive systems. Just not really the insult that you think it is. Something really funny that they said was they like did stitches of a lot of my TikToks, kind of a slay. They were like, swig, swig, she has a swig there, she has a swig there. And then one of them was like, yeah, there she is again with her $15 swig. I'm like, $15 swig. My swig, I actually took note today with the 2 gummy sharks, I believe was like $3.60 or something, $3.60. So this apparently makes me the epitome of a very privileged person to spend $3.60 on a swig. And I'm not saying I am grateful that I can have some spending money to get myself a swig every day. I just like don't think that that's, again, the insult that they think it is, nor is a swig $15. So if anything comes from this, if anyone happens to be listening from that camp, swig is actually about $3. It's going to run you about $3 for a 32 ounce with a couple of, some syrup, coconut syrup, and a fresh lime, and 2 gummy sharks. They also said about me, quote, they always want to condemn their parents for a wholesome upbringing. I mean, some of these things were just so clearly based on literally nothing besides a poor, shallow assumption. If you listen to me, you know that that's not the case, that is a very nuanced and complex thing that so many of us wrestle with. I think that's another thing that's important to talk about here is these broad, sweeping generalizations about people who leave religion at all, about ex-Mormons specifically. We are ungrateful. We hate our parents. We can't understand any of the good things about the church, which is just so untrue. Like, talk to any ex-Mormon for 5 fucking seconds. Usually those things come with a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of complexity, and it's just easier to discredit a whole community of people if you can just make it out to be like ungrateful little bitches who hate their parents for raising them Mormon. It's just not real. whatsoever. I don't know if those guys have like a capability to understand that nuance. It seems likely not really, but yeah, just important to say because I know that happens on different levels too, right? We've all probably, as ex-religious people, have had things like that said about us or leveraged against us that are just not based on the real lived experience of going through that thing of leaving a religion. The next thing I want to talk about is probably the only very valid criticism that I believe was leveraged against me. And this is something that I should have addressed before this whole thing happened. At the girls' camp event, so I did an event for girls' camp in January, end of January, and it was so lovely. I can't wait to do another one, hopefully soon. But at this event, they called me out for two things: for using sound bowls, because we did a sound bath, and because there was a teepee as part of the decor for the event. First things first with the teepee. There's a lot I could say about it, about how that ended up being part of it. It was not the intention to have a teepee specifically. We wanted a tent that was going to be like part of the decor and like have this fun little tent piece. And again, long story short, it was a teepee and there was a teepee there and there shouldn't have been. I have since done research on like the significance of teepees. I'll read a little blurb on it, and I'm really sorry that I had a teepee there. It didn't need to be there. It didn't really have much to do with anything. It just was not appropriate to have a teepee. Let me read that blurb really quick. So teepees are traditional dwellings of certain Native American tribes. They are deeply rooted in the cultural and historical practices of those indigenous peoples. Using or replicating teepees outside of their cultural context, particularly in ways that disregard or disrespect their significance, can be seen as cultural appropriation. This is especially true if such use trivializes or commercializes the cultural heritage of the Native American tribes without acknowledgement or permission. It is important to respect and understand the cultural significance of teepees in order to avoid cultural appropriation and engage with them in a way that honors their origins and the people to whom they belong. So, again, I'm not going to delve into a whole conversation about cultural appropriation. We can save that for another episode, another very important and related conversation to have. But ultimately, like, the teepee was there and it was used as decor, and that's just was not right. And I shouldn't have had it there. And I'm really sorry. I think especially because teepees are associated with indigenous people and all of the history of colonization and the things that are said in the Book of Mormon about indigenous people. It just was not okay that it was there. And that was a misstep on my part. And I'm sorry. And I won't do it again. And I will do better. And we'll just be more careful about those things. This also kind of sparked for me something that I've already been ruminating on as well around New Age spirituality practices and how it can be kind of easy sometimes to step out of Mormonism and step into New Age spirituality, which can also be very problematic and have a lot of appropriation and colonization. And if not navigated carefully and thoughtfully, it can be problematic in a lot of ways that Mormonism is and Christian religions are. And I'm certainly not an expert, nor am I perfect by any means. That's another weird thing about talking about this is I just so badly don't want to be I've learned a thing or two and here's all the ways I've done this so well. I haven't at all. And there's still a lot of these things that I'm kind of working through in real time. Anyway, the TP thing was wrong. The other thing they called out was the sound bowls. I don't even actually know what their point was specifically on calling these things out. I think it was just calling out hypocrisy of leaving Mormonism, saying it's culturally appropriative and these harmful things, and then using a TP, which is also that thing, which is super fair. The sound bowls was interesting because I thought about the sound bowls and I actually did a pretty decent amount of research on sound bowls, where they came from, how they're used as a healing modality. And I talked with Meredith, who was the one who led the sound bath at the event, about her practice using sound bowls and her training and some of my concerns around, are we doing this in a way that really respects and honors and attributes back to the culture of sound bowls. We had a really good conversation. Meredith actually trained in Indonesia. She actually learned from practitioners who come from that lineage, from that ancestry. We made sure that before she did the sound bowls, she spoke to that and spoke to the cultural heritage. And I feel really good about how we navigated that whole thing. It was thoughtful. I think it had attributed back properly. I think the word radio people were kind of trying to be you left religion and now you're doing sound bowls woo woo. I think they were more making fun of it from that perspective more so than anything. And I think maybe even the TB too. But all that to say, it's an interesting discussion. And it's one of those things that I think, it can be, it can feel tricky to navigate. Navigate. They should have called me out on that. They should have called me out on my overuse of the word navigate. But I suppose, people have been there, done that, and have only encouraged me to use the word navigate even more. Anyway, that was something that I wanted to address. Should have addressed it sooner, but happy to have the chance to do that now. Another thing that seems to irk Mormons across the board, because I get many a comment like this, but also particularly irked these grown men, is the monetization aspect of ex-Mormon content creation, podcasts, YouTube, what have you. This is so funny and so ironic for so many reasons, as a lot of this is the person who did that hate watch video, Cultural Hall. They did this montage after they called me out for monetizing and claiming Haley just wants people to watch her videos so she can make so much money to fuel her lifestyle. And then they montaged Word Radio itself and all of the times that they're here's our Venmo, here's our Zelle, support the channel, which they also have their Venmo in their bio. They're also monetized, which content creators need to make money doing content creation. It is what it is. It's labor, and people can't do free labor. I mean, some people can, I guess, but it's not really common that people can dedicate time and energy towards something that they're not making money on, unfortunately. But for some reason, it seems fair to the Mormons that not only their church has $100 billion more than that, but also they can then monetize off of talking about church content, but then people can't monetize off of critiquing the church. So just blatant hypocrisy. Pretty easy to call that one out for what it is, but just a funny little side note. Here's a fun quote that I wrote down from Kwaku. Kwaku was the one who was most passionate in his hatred might be a strong word, but most passionate in hating on me. And he said, quote, "Your whole life you've got to thank Mormons for, and you're whining about the church that built this state in which you're having this top 5% of the world lifestyle. If you decry and defame a religion as inherently toxic and say people who are part of it are harmful, you better not benefit from everything it's built and milk it." This reminded me of one other funny thing I wanted to say, which is something that they kept talking about was I have AirPods, AirPod Maxes, which I love, and I'm very grateful I have them. And that was apparently to them I'm so flagrantly showing off my wealth by having some videos with my AirPod Maxes in them. Those AirPod Maxes, funny enough, this doesn't need to be said to justify me owning AirPod Maxes, but they were actually given to me as a work gift back when I worked at my day job. That was our team's Christmas gift was AirPod Maxes. So I did not purchase those with my own money, actually. And I kept just thinking oh, funny, I actually didn't buy those AirPod Maxes. Another funny aside around the whole class privilege conversation is I was telling my mom about this video, my Mormon mother, and I think it shook her up a little bit because she was like, what the hell? She didn't say hell. But she was like, wait, these are Mormon people? Why are they what is this? And I'm like, yeah, Mom, I don't get it either. But I said, yeah, they just are saying apparently Mormonism gave me everything I have. And now I'm speaking out against Mormonism. And my mom was like, oh, well, you're way better off than you were when you were Mormon, which was funny. It's also just circumstantial because growing up as a Mormon, my parents were divorced and my mom had to go back to school and get a job, and we were fine. I think, relatively speaking, I still feel very lucky for the things I had as a kid, but It's not like we were a super wealthy Mormon family by any stretch of the imagination. And it was just funny because my mom was like, wait, I like don't see the connection. And I was like, yeah. Kind of randomly and bizarrely toward the end of the video, Kwaku started talking about Antifa, the anti-fascist organization. And I think his point, which I'm going to make much better than he made, was like, okay, Haley's speaking out against these systems for their like capitalistic qualities and because they have like systemic sexism, etc. The most extreme people who do that, Antifa, they would actually hate this girl. And if they saw her content, they would, he said, and I quote, I would love for Antifa to watch her because they'd say, to the wall with her. I'm pretty sure implying violence. That's kind of dark and scary. And also just, again, like this kind of odd point of like, if you say anything, you have to be like the most extreme, because if you're not the most extreme, you don't have merit to say anything at all. I don't know. Bringing Antifa into the conversation, I found odd, but also that was kind of the thing, not the only thing, but this leads me to my point about the emotional impact of watching a video like that. I'm not going to dwell here because I don't know if this is like even relatable, but perhaps interesting to watch that video and read through the comments. Rationally, my brain can see it all for what it is. I can see it all for what it is, which is people desperate to protect their truth. That can be very difficult to protect and make sense of. And when they see someone threatening that by calling out some bullshit, by speaking to negative experiences, this defense protective mechanism of like, let's just shit on this person. Let's just attack the character of this woman as opposed to like engaging with the content with what she says. I know that, like I rationally know that, but the felt experience of watching something like that and of reading people commenting about like personal things about me and what I look like and all those things, it's not a fun felt experience in the body. And even when you can rationally see it for what it is, it still feels pretty shitty. And I even hate to admit that because I don't want to admit that these people have any power to make me feel any type of way. But there's that piece of it where it just does feel shitty. And then there's another piece of it where it's like, oh, damn, like people can just be icky and cruel and so unnecessarily so. And this kind of brings me back to one of my first points, which is like, that's just such a bummer about this. Sometimes it can be really hard to delineate between like having conversations about ideas and about systems and about that stuff versus just like shitting on each other and like making fun of each other and just being cruel. It just sucks that kind of comes with the territory in so many, obviously too, like this is not a uniquely ex-religious problem. I think this is just kind of how it is generally to talk about anything. Like it's just easy to reduce people's ideas and then attack them as a person for even saying the idea. Anyway, it was a bummer. I think that was a big part of it, was just being like, oh, this is just sucks. And it's just kind of gross and not something that I want to be a part of. But like I said, it kind of comes with the territory. And anyway, cause some room for self-reflection and also just like reflection on society and, not a hot take, but social media and the internet and just how kind of vile and gross and mean people can be. Oh, they also said at one point, Kwaku said, I'm whoring myself. Whoring, like kind of called me a whore, not directly, but sort of. And I believe there was a lot of talk about the clothes that I wear, basically just slut shaming and saying like, here's a woman who's talking about wearing a tank top, so she's a whore. I do want to read this final quote before we move on to the comments, because this quote, okay, I'm just going to read it. This is by the third guy, not Kwaku. And he seemed to be the nicer one of the bunch for sure. Like kind of trying to be more kind a little bit. And this is a quote that, here goes. Haley, You are a daughter of our Heavenly Father with eternal and divine worth. He has a purpose for you. He has a plan for you that's much bigger than spaghetti straps and fun swig flavors. Oh, a plan much bigger for me than spaghetti straps and fun swig flavors. Spaghetti straps and fun swig flavors. Such a sleigh. I don't think the plan could be any bigger than that, than the joys of spaghetti straps and fun swig flavors. But yeah, that was kind of the only moment that I saw in the recap, at least, where they were like, but Haley, you are a daughter of God. And there is something much better for you if you simply come back. And I'm like, oh yeah, I want to trade in my spaghetti straps and fun swig flavors, which I wouldn't have to trade in, to come hang out at church with you three fuckers. That sounds like a wonderful deal. Thanks. I'm going to come back to the fold and be amongst people like you. No fucking thank you. The irony of being like, let's shit on this girl for 30 minutes, but then throw in a little something about how much her Heavenly Father loves her and she's a daughter of God and he has such a big special plan for her. First of all, condescending. And second of all, yeah, no thank you. I read that quote to Bentley and he was like, is this guy your patriarch? And I'm like, honestly, that statement alone kind of is a sleigh patriarchal blessing. And yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it to replace my other debunked patriarchal blessing. Okay, moving on to the comments. The comments. Let's read and react to some of these comments. Okay, the first one. This is by Kelsey, and I'm calling her out by name because I'm being spiteful. And Kelsey, I do remember her. Let me read her comment first. Haley served in my mission. And then we were in the same writing class at BYU. In that class, she revealed that her aunt got her into tarot cards in one of her memoir pieces, and that's the reason she left. It's so dumb. Her entire life is because of the church. She speaks a second language because of the church. She got an affordable education because of the church. She has the friends she has because of the church. These people have just lost their ability to have gratitude. It's one thing to leave. It's entirely different to build your platform based on your current negative relationship status with the church. Liked by Ward Radio and 158 other people. Lots to talk about here. Okay, Kelsey, yes, she was in my mission. Always had a vibe about her, even then, can't lie. And yes, she was in my writing class. I also am using her name because, yes, I'm being spiteful, sorry. And also because if this person happens to be in any of your lives, she's keeping tabs on you, which is really scary. The fact that she cared enough to, in the even academic setting of a personal writing class, which was the class that we shared, when I wrote a very personal, very meaningful piece of writing. I actually am going to dig that essay back up because I really love it, about figuring out where I'm at with my faith. And this is listening to me, making these judgments and making these assumptions. It's just really icky. I think it says so much too. Like, it says so much about how this training that many a Mormon has about how they can like make sense of people who are even wrestling with their faith. I was fully at BYU at the time. I didn't leave the church. The tarot cards were not my aunt. They were referencing my sister-in-law. And the piece itself, the essay itself, was so much more nuanced than this chick obviously can clearly understand. Also saying like, she even has the friends she has because of the church. It's like, what do you want me to do? Like, ditch every friend I've ever made because they somehow are my friends because of the church? Such an odd thing to be like, you have everything because of the church. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll ditch all my friends and sell my house and give my AirPod Maxes back to my old job so then I can speak out against the church. Like, please make it make sense. Kelsey, it doesn't make sense. Okay, now we're getting into all the white dudes talking about my appearance, which I will say, I'll snark on myself a little bit again. When Kwaku's video came up, I was like, you know, he called me hot and he called me pretty. And not like that I really give a shit what Kwaku thinks, but I'm like, okay, like I'll take it. Like, yeah, you're saying some things about me, but you seem to continually reiterate that I'm hot and pretty. But then I read the comments, and these humbled me pretty quickly. I don't think I could even take the like I'm hot thing because of these comments. Okay, someone said, I had to pause and watch instead of just listening. Kwaku needs to raise his standards of, quote, hot. Word Radio responds, eek. And then Scott Giles responds, she's average, 6 out of 10. The Word Radio responses are one of my favorite parts of this because they're just kind of like that high school boy that's like, ooh, like moded, like got her. It's just like, okay, you got me. Nice. But just Word Radio, like having to be like, ooh, yeah, got her. Okay, here's another one. I have one quibble, Kwaku. She's not hot. She's a Utah 5. Word Radio responds, oof. There was actually lots of those where that came from, just like people being like, yeah, you got everything right except for the she's hot part. She's not hot at all. This one, though, this next comment is really disturbing to me. All the comments were like kind of disturbing in their own way, but this comment is from a woman, and she says, she is not hot. She is a cute girl. She looks like she's about 16 and hasn't quite hit puberty. No hips or boobs. I'm in Young Women's, and she looks like she could be one of the girls in class. This was so icky to me because it's icky and weird for someone to be talking about your body in that way, but especially because this is a self-proclaimed Young Women's leader or teacher. She's working with the young women in some capacity, and she is on the internet watching this video of men mocking me and making fun of me, and she wants to chime in and say, oh, XYZ about her body and compare her to the bodies of the young women in her classes. That alone, I'm just like, this, you know, what more can I say? Like, I am not saying that all the people in Young Women are this way. They are not. I've had fantastic Young Women's leaders. I've had very loving, very kind Young Women's leaders who remain loving and kind to me to this day. But there is a Young Women leader, wherever she may be out there, who feels justified in watching a hate video about me and then commenting on my boobs and my hips while saying that she's a Young Women's leader and that she's like obviously also taking stock of the bodies of the young women in her class. I don't know how much more I can say about that one, but that one hit so hard. Why? This appearance thing, this body thing. Now I'm going to get into the like pretty privilege thing. Yes, I think that there is absolutely privilege when you fit conventional beauty standards, whatever those may be. I think that's a real thing. And I think it affects things. I think it particularly affects things on social media. It can affect the palatability of someone, like who people are willing to listen to as opposed to other people. That is so real. And like, again, an important part of the conversation. I also just think there's part of that that feels particularly problematic to be leveraged against me by Mormonism, because there's also this thing that I think any person listening, any woman listening, has felt this feeling of growing up as a Mormon woman and just feeling so small and feeling so defined by the way that you look, the way that your body looks, by the clothing that you wear. Don't reduce me to that. Don't reduce me to like what the size of my boobs are, or like if I have hips or not, or like even to call me hot. Like even that's reductive. Like it just, there's so many layers to this that are just like, ugh. And yeah, that comment brought a lot of that out. It's icky from men. It's really icky from women too. It's like icky to see women piling on this thing of like, oh, well, she's not hot. Sure, she's a cute girl. It's just like, ew, like why, what is this? What are we doing? Like, what is this? What is going on here? We've really just strayed away from the plot in so many ways. And yeah. Okay, here's a fun one to lighten the mood. She is the Mormon equivalent of Meghan Markle. While there are criticisms that can be made of the royal family, Meghan Markle is just the wrong person to make them, as she goes on Oprah and gets $100 million Netflix deal. Word Radio, LOL. another funny comparison, because it's like, yeah, obviously Meghan Markle is hugely privileged, but that does not mean that she didn't experience racism at the hands of the royal family and can speak uniquely to experiencing that because she experienced racism. So like, what does the $100 million Netflix deal have to do with it? Not so sure about some of this logical reasoning on behalf of the Mormons who appreciate Ward Radio. Also, I'm making another disclaimer. Not all Mormons are this way. Like, thank God for my mom, because I can like tell her, like I talked to her about this. I'm like, yeah, these are some of the things people are saying. And my mom's just like, what? This is probably the worst of Mormonism, to be fair. I'm not saying it's not representative in some ways, that there's not through lines of what Mormonism teaches, but like this is probably like the cesspool of Mormonism is Ward Radio comments. That's an important disclaimer. Okay, next one. I am 100% with Kwaku. So tired of these anti-church kids who spit in the face of their pioneer ancestors. They have no clue how great they have it. My parents were converts to the church in 1980. My ancestors were alcoholics who had to move around to avoid creditors, whose children had to be bootleggers during Prohibition to help the family. She has never had to make the decision to feed the family or pay rent/mortgage. Okay, these are kind of getting redundant at this point, but yeah, I wasn't like I didn't live in the 1980s with avoiding creditors, etc. Just like really failing to see the relevancy here. The point about having to decide between feeding my family or paying the rent and mortgage, I don't know what that feels like. That sounds incredibly, incredibly difficult. I just am failing to see how Mormonism's the thing that prevented me necessarily from feeling that way, especially if we really want to get into the ins and outs of like the generosity of Mormonism and what they do give and what they don't give. I mean, I will say, like, growing up, I think growing up, there felt like there was a safety net. I think in largest part because of extended family. So like when my parents got divorced and my mom had to go back to work and stuff, I don't think I ever truly felt this sense of like, oh, like we're not going to be okay. I think the biggest part of that was because of grandparents and extended family. Like we always had a place to go if we needed to. I also think that the church probably played into that. We had a stable community structure. I think that just helped in knowing like we're never just going to be completely hung out to dry. We could get food through the church. I don't know if we ever did. I'd have to ask my mom. And also just beyond like the actual church giving money or resources, the church community, I think really helped in that. But, the thing that I think a lot of these people are failing to see is like multiple things can be true at once, of course, where like, yeah, I can be really grateful for that and glad for that. It's not unique to the Mormon church to have that. Number one, it is lucky that I had that, even with or without the Mormon church. And also two things can be true at once, that the church can do some good and provide some benefits and also be a whole host of other problematic things that still need to be spoken to, despite that it did good things. I actually just watched a really good reel by Mormon Stories where they were interviewing Sebastian of the Black Menaces, and he's phenomenal. He and John DeLynn were having a really interesting conversation where they were talking about this dilemma because Sebastian is Black, and he was saying like, okay, if you kind of had to choose between like relying on the church for stability and like food resources, while also knowing the church is racist, the hierarchy of needs would be such that you could still stay in a racist church because like it's helping you get food on the table, and how there's a lot of complexity there. And I just want to make a nod to that because I think that's also a very real piece of this puzzle of like, needing resources. And I think for the privilege thing too, some people can't speak out about these things because they don't have the privilege to do so, or they can't leave the church because they don't have the privilege to leave the church. In order to leave the church, a lot of times you have to have a certain amount of like social safety net. I also think that there is privilege in leaving the church too, but I don't think the point made by this commenter is really making too much sense. Also, sorry, I'm going to make a dead dad kind of flippant joke. So I haven't done this on the podcast yet. I do this a lot in real life, but I love my dad. I think it's sometimes funny when people are like, oh, they're parents were alcoholics. I'm like, my dad was fully an alcoholic and a drug addict. Okay, I missed my chance to make the joke because now I'm just talking about it. But Mormonism doesn't prevent alcoholism. It doesn't prevent addiction. It doesn't prevent divorce. It doesn't prevent poverty. Like, it doesn't prevent those things. And sure, like I said, it can maybe sometimes provide structures that help. As far as like alcoholism and drug addiction specifically, I was Mormon and I was not saved from that. My dad grew up Mormon and he was not saved from alcoholism. Like, that's also not real. Okay, we're going to be done with that word radio breakdown. Thank you for letting me walk through that with you. I had a lot of thoughts, as well, because I just shared them all with you. I try not to get too snarky, but I think I did, especially about that girl from my mission and my BYU class, which now that I'm saying this, I'm probably going to bleep her name out because whatever. I don't need to call her out specifically. And I also think I called her a bitch, which maybe I'll bleep out too because I don't know. It's just, yeah, it's hard not to like, that's what's hard is like when people are being just mean, like you just want to be mean back. I don't know. I'll think about it. I'll listen back and see how mean it comes across. But hey, they don't call me ex-Mormon mean girl for nothing. I have to live up to that now, I guess. The very last thing I want to talk about is this other video came out and this person actually had DM'd me. It's a guy and he had DM'd me multiple times. And I didn't see the DMs. And then someone sent me this YouTube video. And then I clicked on his page and like I had seen that he had DM'd me. I thought it was actually a really nice courtesy to like reach out to me. And he was like, here's my number. If you want to talk, I'm going to react to some of your content just so you know. And I was like, oh, thanks. That's actually nice to have a heads up. And he made a video about me where he was reacting to my reel with Amy and I talking about the natural man is an enemy of God and how that's one of the most dangerous teachings of Mormonism about sex. And then he talked about a reel I posted about people's family abandoning them when they leave the church. He was much more respectful, much more, I think, just measured. He was more talking about like the content that we were speaking about, did not attack my character, did not attack my looks, which the bar's in literal hell, but I guess thanks for that. Yeah, it was an interesting video to watch because just obviously, I mean, maybe not obviously, but really completely disagreed with his take on what Amy and I were saying about sex. Think that it kind of shone a light on me yet again for like how reductive Mormon teachings on sex are. His whole point was basically, Amy says, natural man is an enemy of God and how sad that we weren't allowed to be like our natural selves, especially when it comes to sex. And then this guy, the first thing he kind of says is like, well, my 3-year-old nephew loves to push his 1-year-old sister. And, kind of the point was, I don't mean to reduce his point too much, but I don't think really the point was like, so what? We're all just supposed to push people when we're mad. It's like, no, no, that's not the point at all. Actually, it's kind of the point that a lot of people make, which I appreciate Andrew touching on this in last week's episode, where he's kind of like, people are like, well, without religion, how is anyone going to be a good person? And he said, it's the easiest thing in the world. And I laughed out loud because I'm like, yeah, if we need to be good because we want to be rewarded one day by God, I'm just like not seeing that, just like doesn't click for me anymore. I think like human beings have an innate goodness, an innate understanding. And anyway, it was just kind of interesting to think about this mentality of like, oh, well, if you let yourself sexually explore, it's going to be complete anarchy and everyone's just going to be like having sex with everybody else and like society will crumble. Maybe for you, like maybe if you could have sex with anybody, that's what you would do. But like, I don't think that's really how mature adults operate. And then he stitched a video where I was talking about Mormon family members withdrawing love and support from people who leave the church. And I appreciated what he had to say because he was like, yeah, that's like not, we shouldn't do that. And that's not what we've been called to do, and show me the doctrine that says we should do that. I could show him some doctrines from prophets and apostles that say they should do that, but he was hearkening back to like the Bible, and yeah, it doesn't say to do that. It was kind of funny that those videos kind of happened in quick succession, and after the word radio video, I was like, hey, this one was super cool. that person called me out multiple times in the video and was like, Haley, please come on. I'd love to have a chat with you. And I'm just like, no. I mean, I'll probably DM this person and whatever. I'm like, fine to talk about it. But there was a piece of me that was like, let's get Kwaku on here and like chat it out. But I just don't think I want to do that. I don't think other people are doing that. And I think that's great. I just like don't think that's really my speed. And I don't know. Don't just like really want to platform those people, but never say never. For now, that's where I'm at. And that's all for today, folks. Folks. My Utah accent. I'm working on both because Utah people say both with like an L. So I try and say both instead of both. Steps at a time. Also doesn't matter anyway. Yeah, that's all for today. Thank you so much for listening to me kind of rant and rave and get all of that out. Feels good to get that into the world. And I'm excited to hear all your thoughts and feelings about it because some of these things are complicated things. Some of the things are not so complicated, like the swig thing. But, you know, the privilege thing, the cultural appropriation thing, I want to be better about opening up those conversations and curious what all of your thoughts are. And, you know, we got time. We got time to dig way deeper into those topics with people who are more qualified to do so and who have, you know, more expertise in the area. So I'm excited to do that and we can all look forward to that. And I love you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting, you know, me just grifting on Ex-Mormon content so I can make so much money. If you want to support, please follow me on Instagram, Girls Camp Podcast, on TikTok, Haley Rawl, on YouTube, Girls Camp Podcast, and, you know, leave a rating, review, and DM me. Always love hearing your stories, your thoughts and feelings, and love you. Can't wait to talk next week. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.